Las Vegas, late 1960s. A sold-out room breathing in unison. The orchestra eases into a song everyone already knows how to feel about. Glasses catch the light. Smiles arrive early. This is supposed to be easy. Half song, half joke. Nothing that asks too much. Then a hand goes up. Not a cue. Not a tease. The orchestra stops mid-bar. Confusion ripples through the room. A few scattered claps. Someone laughs, assuming the setup of a bit they'll recognize in a second. They don't. Dean's voice comes back, not projected, not playful. "I was just told something backstage," he says, "and I can't keep singing while it's sitting here." The front rows shift. People turn, searching for the punchline. There isn't one. A child sits near the aisle. Small, still, a doctor beside her. A nurse close enough to reach. Clear tubing catching the stage light. Time thinning, visibly. This isn't a feel-good story. It's a moment that was never meant to exist on a stage. And once it did, nothing about the night could be put back where it belonged. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The evening was designed to glide. Not soar, not challenge, just glide, smooth as a drink poured without looking. The lights came up warm, forgiving. The orchestra eased into a tempo that had been played 1,000 times before and never failed. And Dean stepped into it the way he always did. Loose shoulders, half smile already in place, voice landing a fraction behind the beat as if he were following the music rather than leading it. To the audience, it looked effortless. The familiar routine, the playful pause before a punchline, the casual lean against the microphone stand, the impression that he might be just a little unsteady on his feet. People loved that part. They always had. The suggestion that this was all happening by accident. But he wasn't drifting tonight. He was listening. Midway through the first number, he felt it before he understood it. A pocket of air that didn't move. Applause rolled in waves everywhere else, hands clapping, chairs shifting, the low hum of approval. But somewhere off to his right, the sound thinned. Not silence exactly. Something heavier. Held. He sang through it once. Missed a word. Barely noticeable, but it tugged at him. He adjusted, stretched the next phrase longer than planned. The orchestra followed, professionals to the core. The pause felt different, not playful, not teasing. It lingered, asking a question no one had rehearsed. From the wings, someone shifted. A producer glanced toward the house, then quickly back to the monitors. On the screen, the camera drifted away from that side of the room, favoring a safer angle. Faces smiling, hands moving, the picture everyone expected to see. Dean noticed that too. He filled the gap with a quiet aside, not quite a joke, just enough to keep the rhythm alive. The audience laughed on cue. Still, that section didn't answer back. He felt his throat tighten. Not fear, not nerves, something closer to irritation at himself for being distracted. This was supposed to be an easy night. A good crowd, clean timing, no reason to dig. Backstage, the organizers exchanged glances they'd practiced earlier. The decision had already been made hours ago. Keep it simple. Keep it light. The child's presence was meant to be invisible. A kindness, not a complication. No one had wanted to burden him with details. Let him do what he does best. On stage, he let another pause stretch, longer than comfort allowed. The orchestra hovered, waiting for his breath. For a moment, the room balanced on nothing. Then he came back in, smooth again, voice steady. But his eyes didn't lift to the balcony or sweep the center rows. They returned, deliberately, to that quiet place. The song ended. Applause surged. He nodded, smiled, tipped an imaginary glass. Everything looked right. It wasn't. And for the first time that evening, he stopped trusting the script and started reading the room instead. The applause carried him to the edge of the stage, but it didn't reach inside. The lights dipped for a scheduled musical break, just enough cover for movement that wasn't meant to be seen. Dean wiped his hands on his jacket, more out of habit than sweat, and turned slightly as someone approached from behind. Not boldly, not the way people usually did when they needed him. His manager didn't meet his eyes at first. He leaned in close enough that the smell of cigarettes and paper clung to the words before they were spoken. "There's a child in the house," he said quietly, then stopped, as if testing whether that was enough. Dean stayed still. The orchestra adjusted their sheets. Somewhere, a chair scraped. The pause between breaths stretched again, unnoticed by most of the room. "From the hospital," the man continued, voice lower now. "This was a last outing. The family asked only that she be here. No mention, no spotlight." Dean didn't nod. He didn't ask why no one had told him earlier. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor just past the footlights, where scuffs from decades of shoes caught the glow. "How long?" he asked. The answer came after a beat. "Not long." Another figure stepped closer. A doctor, identifiable not by coat, but by the way he held himself. Alert and careful, even in a place built for illusion. He spoke without introduction, as if time had stripped away formalities. "We asked that nothing change," he said. "Her condition is unstable. Excitement, attention. It could make things worse." Dean listened, but something in him shifted at a different sentence, one that hadn't been said yet. "Does she hear me?" he asked. The question surprised them. It surprised him too. It wasn't about protocol or timing or whether this would turn into a problem. It landed softly, almost gently, in the narrow space between them. "We're not sure," the doctor said, honest, unrehearsed. From the house came a ripple of laughter, someone reacting late to a joke already finished. Dean inhaled, slow and deliberate, the kind of breath taken before a choice, not before a note. He could return to the microphone, finish clean, deliver exactly what people came for. No one would fault him. No one would even know. It would be professional, impeccable, forgettable in the way good evenings often are. But his eyes had already found that section again. Stillness framed by movement. A silence that wasn't passive, but waiting. The stage manager gestured urgently from the side. The clock was ticking. The cameras were ready to come back up. Dean straightened his jacket. Not as a performer preparing to continue, but as a man bracing himself for something that couldn't be undone. "Give me a moment," he said. No one answered. The lights began to rise. The music was supposed to come back in gently. A familiar cue everyone knew how to follow. Instead, Dean lifted his hand, not sharply, not for effect. Just enough. The orchestra stopped. Bows hovered above strings. A trumpet player froze mid-adjustment, mouthpiece inches from his lips. The conductor's arms remained raised, suspended in a posture that had never been rehearsed. It took a second for the room to understand that this wasn't timing. This was interruption. A ripple moved through the audience. Someone laughed, short and uncertain, assuming a bit was forming. Dean didn't acknowledge it. He stepped away from the microphone, leaving it upright and untouched, and the small feedback hum that followed sounded louder than it should have. He turned, not toward the band, not toward the cameras, but toward the steps at the side of the stage. A stagehand made a reflexive move to block him, then stopped. The producer's voice cut sharply through the headset, unheard by anyone else. "Don't." A red light blinked. The broadcast clock bled seconds. Dean took the steps slowly, one at a time. No flourish, no wave. His shoes met the carpeted aisle, and suddenly he was no longer elevated. The distance between him and the audience collapsed in a way that felt wrong, almost intimate. He walked without scanning faces. He knew where he was going. The quiet section wasn't quiet anymore, not now that attention leaned toward it, but it held itself differently. People shifted to make space without being asked. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth. A man stood, then sat again, unsure of the rules. Dean stopped beside the row. He didn't speak to the room. He didn't even look at most of it. He bent slightly, just enough to bring himself level with a small figure wrapped in blankets, oxygen tubing catching the light like thin glass. The laughter had vanished. So had the music. What remained was the sound of breathing. His, uneven for once, and something lighter, strained, coming from the seat beside him. From the stage, the conductor lowered his hands slowly, as if gravity had finally returned. Someone whispered Dean's name. It went unanswered. He said one sentence, not projected, not meant to carry. It wasn't a line anyone else had paid for. A nurse shifted, tense. A doctor leaned forward, ready. The producer made a sharp cutting motion in the air that no one followed. Dean stayed where he was. The entire room could see him now, clearly, undeniably, standing beside the child. And whatever he was about to do, no one could stop it. He was close enough now to hear the machinery working harder than it should. A faint, rhythmic click. A breath drawn in pieces instead of a line. Dean lowered himself further, not kneeling, not standing, finding a height that didn't loom. The stage lights washed past him, leaving this corner of the room dimmer, almost private. He didn't reach out. His hands stayed visible, open, resting against his own knees. He waited. Not out of uncertainty, but out of respect, as if permission mattered more than urgency. The child's eyes were open, unfocused at first, then drifting, slowly, toward him. It took effort. He could see that. Every movement cost something. Behind them, the doctor stepped forward, voice controlled, but tight. "Mr. Martin," he said quietly. "Her breathing." Dean didn't turn his head. He acknowledged the words with the smallest nod, the kind given between adults who already understand the stakes. The nurse's fingers hovered near a valve, ready to intervene. Dean leaned in just enough for his voice to travel no farther than it had to. He didn't introduce himself, didn't explain why he was there. He began to hum. It wasn't a song anyone could name. No opening line, no recognizable structure. Just a melody shaped by memory, something he used to murmur to himself late at night, half asleep, when the house was quiet and no one was listening. The sound barely carried. It wasn't meant to. The room strained toward it anyway. Without amplification, without permission, the tune found its way into the space like a held breath finally released. People in the surrounding rows leaned forward, though they couldn't make out the notes. They only felt the shift, the way the moment stopped belonging to them. The child's fingers moved, not lifting, not reaching, just a slight tightening, as if responding to pressure that wasn't physical. The doctor hesitated. He checked the monitor, then checked it again. The numbers wavered, then steadied, not improving, not worsening, holding. Dean kept humming, eyes lowered, voice steady but careful, pacing each sound to the rise and fall in front of him. His own breathing adjusted without conscious thought, sinking, slowing. Someone near the aisle began to cry quietly. No one turned to look. The producer stood frozen, understanding now that this couldn't be reframed, couldn't be softened later. This wasn't material. It was exposure. The child's lips parted. No sound came at first. Dean stopped humming immediately, the silence landing heavy but intentional. He leaned closer, close enough that only one person could hear what came next. Whatever was said, if anything, never reached the room. Dean's face changed, just slightly. Not shock, not sorrow. Recognition. He stayed bent there, listening, while the entire theater waited with him, suspended in a moment that refused to resolve. He straightened slowly, as if rising too fast might fracture what had just held together. For a second, he remained beside the seat, eyes still lowered. Then he stepped back into the aisle. The nurse moved in at once, practiced, efficient. The doctor spoke in short instructions. Dean did not listen. He didn't need to. His part there was finished. When he turned toward the stage, there was no sound waiting for him. No applause, no coughs masked by clapping, no reassuring shuffle of approval. The audience stayed exactly where they were, caught between standing and sitting, between response and restraint. It was a silence that didn't ask to be filled. He climbed the steps, alone. The microphone was still where he had left it, angled slightly wrong, a thin thread of feedback whispering into the house. He adjusted it once, then stopped himself and stepped away. He didn't want it closer. "I'm not going to finish this the way we planned," he said. His voice carried, but he didn't project it. No explanation followed, no context. The sentence landed without decoration, and he let it sit there, unprotected. The conductor looked to him for instruction. Dean shook his head. "No band," he added. "Not tonight." From the side, a stage manager mouthed something urgent. The red light above the camera blinked, then went dark. Someone, somewhere, made a decision. Dean crossed to the edge of the stage and gestured subtly. The house lights dimmed, not fully, just enough to soften faces into shapes. People began to stand, not all at once, not dramatically. A few at first. Then more. Some turned toward the exits, moving quietly, as if leaving a place of worship mid-service. No one stopped them. No one judged. Dean waited until the movement settled. Then he sang. One song. Slower than it had ever been played. Stripped of the phrasing people expected, stripped of the warmth that usually invited smiles. Each note was placed carefully, measured against breath rather than rhythm. It wasn't offered outward. It was sent in one direction only. When he finished, there was still no applause. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and stepped back. The curtain came down without flourish. Backstage, the air shifted. Voices returned, sharper now. A contract was cited. A schedule referenced. Someone said the word perfect like an accusation. "You just ruined an ideal show," his manager said, not unkindly, just tired. Dean loosened his tie. "Then it wasn't," he replied. He didn't wait for a car to take him home. Instead, he asked a single question, quietly, to the nearest assistant. Where did they take her? And for the first time that night, he wasn't thinking about what had happened, only about where it had gone. The car didn't head toward the hotel lights or the quiet reassurance of a familiar bar. At the first intersection, Dean told the driver to turn the other way. The city thinned quickly after that, neon replaced by street lamps, noise by distance. He loosened his collar but didn't remove it. Some habits stayed even when the night stopped performing. They used a side entrance at the hospital. No cameras, no recognition. Just a guard who glanced up, then back down, and waved them through without comment. Dean stepped out alone. The doors closed behind him with a sound too final for something so ordinary. Inside, everything moved at a different pace. wheels rolling softly, shoes that didn't rush, voices trained not to rise. He gave his name once, quietly, then took a seat along the wall like anyone else waiting for news they didn't want. Time stretched. Minutes lost shape. No one hurried to him. No one asked for an autograph. Eventually, a nurse approached. Her face carried the careful neutrality learned over years of delivering truths in pieces. "She had a difficult night," she said. "After the concert?" Dean nodded. Not because he understood everything, but because he accepted the weight of it. He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask to see her. Instead, he reached into his jacket and took out a small, folded square of fabric. Plain. Soft from use. He held it out. "Would you give her this?" he asked. "And tell her someone sang for her." The nurse hesitated. "Should I say who?" He shook his head. "No." He spoke briefly with the doctor, about nothing official. No press, no paperwork. He left an envelope without marking it, insisting it be handled quietly, directly. When thanked, he interrupted with a glance that ended the sentence before it began. By the time he stepped back outside, the sky had begun to pale. Morning approached without ceremony. The phone rang not long after, while the car idled at a light. He answered on the second ring. There was no build-up on the other end. No easing into it. Just the truth. Delivered clean. She passed just before dawn. Dean closed his eyes. Not long. Just enough to steady himself. "Thank you for calling," he said. He ended the call and sat in silence as the light changed. The driver waited for instruction. None came. When the car finally moved, Dean looked out at the waking city, understanding something he hadn't before. That some nights leave no echo, only a quiet that follows you home and stays. The evening never became a headline the way some expected. There were no bold columns about compassion or courage. The broadcast that eventually aired showed a clean cut, an unexplained pause, a softened transition, a brief note about technical difficulties. Viewers at home assumed a mistake and forgot it by morning. Those who were there didn't. Weeks passed. The tour continued. New cities, familiar dressing rooms, the same polite greetings delivered with practiced warmth. From the outside, nothing appeared altered. The timing returned. The jokes landed. The voice carried exactly as it always had. Except for one absence. A song quietly disappeared from the set list. No announcement, no replacement. When asked, Dean shrugged it off as preference, as mood. The truth stayed unspoken, even among those closest to him. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't grief in the theatrical sense. It was simply that the song no longer belonged to the stage. He never repeated the gesture, never stopped a show that way again. The pause remained singular, unborrowed, untouched by imitation. It wasn't a move, it was a moment, and moments don't survive repetition. Years later, a theater usher mentioned something curious to a colleague. How Dean, just before stepping into the lights, would glance toward the same section of the house every night. Not scanning, not searching, just acknowledging the space, as if confirming it still existed. Dean never told the story himself. Not at dinners, not in interviews, not even in private conversations meant for trust. When pressed once, gently, by someone who had earned the right, he offered only a sentence, spoken without emphasis. "That night," he said, "I wasn't a singer." There was no follow-up. What remained lived elsewhere, in the memory of an orchestra that learned how silence could lead, in a producer who never again dismissed a pause as dead time, in a nurse who kept a folded piece of fabric long after it had lost its purpose, and in the space between notes. If you listen closely to recordings from that era, you can hear it. a fraction of hesitation, a breath taken differently. Engineers mark it as error, something unplanned, something that shouldn't be there. But those who sat in that room know better. They remember the moment the music stopped, not because it failed, but because it knew when to step aside. And they understand that, for once, the truest sound of the evening wasn't the song that followed. It was the quiet that refused to be filled.